Good.
Okay.
We on? Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone into this regular scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission for Tuesday, August 24th, 2021. I'm going to open the meeting at 7:30, and let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have roll call, please?
Mr. Fitzer,
Here.
Mr. Cusero,
Here.
Mr. McHale,
Here.
Mr. Nushai,
Here.
Mr. Pernick,
Here.
Ms. Redmond,
Here.
Mr. Sinaki, and Mr. Watson. All right, there's quorum.
Thank you. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting that we've had.
I'll make a motion that we approve the regular meeting minutes from August 10th, 2021 as presented.
Support.
A motion support. Any comments, any corrections, changes? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Cusero,
Yes.
Mr. McHale,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Mr. Pernick,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 5 is public discussion, items not on the agenda. So at this point, I'll open it to public. We only have one public here in the audience, and it looks like we have maybe 3 online.
No members of the public in
No?
the Zoom.
No members?
Nope.
Okay, it's pretty easy then. In that case, I will close public discussion. And I'll move on to agenda item number 6. We'll have a public hearing amending to zoning ordinance section 34-1058 regarding building materials. And I'll let Joe walk us through this, or Jill.
Thank you. So I got the text up there. I might as well just go into presentation mode, I suppose. Oops. If I can get there. There we go. I think you'll be able to see it a little bit better. Yeah, okay, slightly larger. So, it was a couple months ago now when we set a public hearing on this. And basically, the idea was that we were going to prohibit certain building materials on the ground level outside of the CC and CMD districts. And in those two districts, those materials are already prohibited at the ground level. So, we have an intent statement here. The purpose of these regulations is to improve the health, safety, and welfare of residents and visitors and ensure the durability of non-residential construction. Standards are further intended to foster the aesthetic appeal of the city by reducing long-term building maintenance needs. And then here's where this applies, and then the actual standards I've got on the next slide here. So we've got a general, you have to maintain your building standard. And then a kind of somewhat more specific, comprised of durable material standards. And we've given ourselves the ability to maintain a building material guidelines document separate from the ordinance that includes a list of recommended materials. We can develop that at any time. And then we're specifically calling out exterior insulation finishing systems and aluminum siding within 10 feet of finish grade at the base of a building. And basically, the reason for that is that in the experience of the city, We found that those particular materials, when located that close to the ground, have a tendency to be easily damaged by contact, and that conflicts with items 1 and 2, where we wind up with buildings that kind of have these crumbling facades, and it doesn't meet the durability goal, and it keeps things from being maintained in good order as easily as they might otherwise be. And then the fourth one is just noting that if you're in the CC or CMD district, you have to go look at another section for the building facade standards for those districts. But that's it. I mean, it's a fairly simple amendment to provide some building material standards. And if in the future the city ever wanted to build on this, this is a section that could be expanded, however you wanted to. For right now, we agreed that we were going to keep it simple and not be too prescriptive. We were going to, simply look at a couple of problem materials and deal with those for the time being. And if we ever want to do anything else, we can in the future. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
EFS seemed to be the biggest problem that we ran into in this, and
Definitely.
EFS is not allowed in the downtown area. It is allowed in other parts of the city.
That's right.
Changing this ordinance that's still approved in the other parts of the city, have we changed anything to affect that? We're not really saying you can't do it. We're just saying we just don't like you to do it. Is that?
Well, we're saying that those are not permitted, that EFS and aluminum siding, you can't put those within 10 feet of grade. That's going to be citywide now. If you're building a non-residential building, these materials aren't going to be on the ground level, basically. If you want to put them on an upper level or something, or if it's your cornice or something, okay, that's fine. That's an aesthetic choice that you're able to make for your property. But we're looking down at the ground level where I can think of several instances of buildings around town where
Right.
this EFS in particular has gotten pretty badly chopped up.
And the ones that are existing are somewhat grandfathered in.
Yeah, if you've already got that material on your building, if you were ever to renovate your building, you would be switching to something else. But for the time being, provided you're meeting the maintenance standard.
At that point, we could have them remove it if they renovate a building?
If they were going to redo their facade, yeah, you wouldn't have someone take that material off their building
And replace it
and then
with the same.
replace it with the same. You would have them replace it with something that's compliant with the existing ordinance.
Right. Okay, I'm pleased with that. Anybody have any questions?
No, because we did discuss as far as the responsibility of the owner to maintain
Exactly.
that item too, so that
Right.
we were quite specific on that.
Yes.
And that's up to code enforcement to enforce whether the building is in disrepair or...
Yeah, ultimately, yep.
Anyone else? Well, this is open to a public hearing, but do we have any public out there yet?
I don't believe so. Unless there's somebody online.
It's, no,
Okay.
it's not that
Okay.
exciting of
Well-
a subject for the public.
I guess you can open the hearing and then close it.
Okay, public hearing has been opened. Public hearing is now closed. Do you need a motion to move this up to the council, or?
Yes.
I'd entertain a motion to that effect.
Okay, then I'll make a motion that we move the proposed zoning ordinance section amendment to city council as presented here.
Support.
Motion support. I would add ordinance section 34-1058 to that. So
Yes, I would.
you know exactly what they're talking
I
about.
would exactly do that too.
Okay, so we have motion support. Roll call, please.
Mr. Nushai.
Yes.
Mr. Pernick.
Yes.
Ms. Redmond.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer.
Yes.
Mr. Kucera.
Yes.
And Mr. McHale.
Yes,
Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, we will push that along to city council. Thank you.
Very good. Agenda item number 7 is other business, and under that is A, the master plan update.
Yes, I'll just stay here. Thanks. So we gave you a couple documents, and if you had any trouble getting them, I know a couple of you did, and I sent PDFs directly to you. We do have a few printed copies of some of those documents here if anybody wants them.
Can I get one of
Oh, they're in color.
the platted ones? Okay,
There we go.
thank you.
I'll take one.
Thank you.
Where did we get left out?
Oh, you know what?
I'm fine.
I have one of, Jill, I have one of these. Do you have the other one with
I
the
have
plots?
I have it
Oh.
on
Yes, yeah, she's got those here.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
trade.
my.
Oh.
You in person.
Aaron wants to trade.
Could I? If someone needs this, I printed this one. Thank you.
Anybody else want to?
There we go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep, I got a black and white.
Yep. So we've got to the point now in this master plan update where we're into the policy discussion. We've been through some public input. We'll still have a little bit after this, but we've been through the kind of first round of public input. We've gotten some feedback from the community. We've done the kind of baseline research. Importantly, the bond issue has passed now, so the schools are going to be free to consider their options moving forward. And their options most likely are going to center around consolidation of the Shulman Baker school sites with the middle school, high school campus, and then ultimately the sale of those two school sites for redevelopment. And basically, our job here, putting this plan together, is to communicate what we think would be in the best interest of the city to see on those sites. And to that end, we've given you kind of a grab bag of ideas that we're going to discuss tonight.
Not completely random.
Yeah, exactly. It's not random, but there's some reasoning behind all of it. But we're going to discuss those tonight, and we're going to settle on what you feel is the kind of the best path forward, and then we'll write that up and we'll update the draft and get that back to you. So I have a little summary of public input up on the slide here. We had on our survey and at our open house, we gave some examples of a wide variety of housing types that could potentially occupy these sites. And one that really nobody responded to positively was like large-scale multifamily development, like an apartment building. People saw that and said, that doesn't seem like it's right for these sites. And I think you can all probably guess why. They're in the middle of single-family neighborhoods, right? They're not out on a major road. So we've not included any of that in what we're showing you. And, you know, it just didn't seem like it would be productive to have that conversation about that. You know, people generally want development that, you know, matches the scale and character of surrounding residential development. They are open to some alternative layouts, you know, alley access, the idea of a cottage court, and we'll talk more detail about that later, or some open space arrangements. And then some respondents did talk about a desire to preserve some open space on those sites. And then, you know, of course, one of them is right next to Clawson Park, so is there a way that you could maybe tie the development into what's across the street? And then the Baker site is south of some other open land that's not part of the school district property, so that could potentially be developed on its own as a complement to whatever happens on that site. And one of our illustrations kind of hints at that. respondents were open to the idea of accessory dwelling units, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. And then some attached or multiplex units might be acceptable if they're done in a way that respects the surrounding area. So really, we'd probably be talking mostly about the Shalom site, although there's a possibility on the Baker site, which we'll see in a minute. And, you know, the location of those units and how they're oriented, I think, becomes important. You may be able to get some of them in there to increase the variety of the types of units that you're offering in the city without having them directly abutting existing development. So we'll start with Shalom. We've got a couple of kind of conceptual layouts that sort of hint at different ways that you could treat this site. And, you know, we've just got a couple photos of it here, one from the southwest and the other one from the northeast. So this is what's there now. You've got this playing field in the back. And of course, the building up by the intersection at Elmwood. And then there it is from the air. So you've got the building kind of surrounding this courtyard. You've got 2 parking areas, and then a couple play areas, 3 actually, and this ball field over here. And then on the same block, there is a row of houses to the north. You've got some single-family homes up there. And that brings us to the conceptual layout. So this one shows 47 units, and they're primarily in the style of, you know, a typical Clawson neighborhood where you have a detached garage in the back and, you know, a little street grid that's been punched into the property. And then over on the right here, we have a slightly different configuration than what we're used to, where we've got an alley going through the middle with all the garages facing the rear. And what that does is it creates a situation where you have a long sidewalk along the street here instead of driveways interrupting it, and another one here along this new internal street. And then the alley itself is really just, that's where you put your car at night. That's how you get into your garage. And I'll go through the 3 and then we can kind of talk about what we're seeing. This next one shows 53 units. This one has 2 alleys. It's kind of treating both of these sections the same. You could even reorient these driveways here to this alley instead of out to this street. And what this one does, because you've got this alley here, this thing in the middle, it could be a street, but it could also be just a common. It could be a green area, because you don't need it to access these houses. You'd probably have to do something from a fire perspective so that you would have emergency access in the middle there. But that's just a matter of grading and making sure that you've got the right surfacing. But you have the potential to have a nice common area in the middle here by using these alleys to provide access to these houses. And then over here on the park side, this shows some of those attached units we're talking about, where these are really quadplexes because they've got 4 garages on each. But it could be duplexes, it could be something else over there, it could be townhomes or something like that. But the idea is you've got neighboring single-family houses up here, single-family houses across the street here, and you're presenting one facade to those houses that is kind of similar to what is typical for development, but then you have your larger buildings facing the park, and the open space across the street diminishes the impact of those larger buildings. And then this one goes a little further by having interior to the development, a couple of larger buildings. This one's 8 units, this one's 7 units. And they're townhomes. And again, they've been separated from the existing development by single-family homes that are quite similar to what's around, but it gives you a chance to explore some other building typologies without having a significant impact on the surrounding neighborhood. So I guess I'm interested in your reactions to those. Do you feel like the way that the larger buildings are worked in makes sense? How do you feel about the alley access?
Can I ask a question about, well, in particular, so building size, and when you say 8 units, 7 units, what are those, single, like one-bedroom units? Are they two? Are they like?
They'd probably be 2 or 3 bedrooms, something like that.
2 or
It really
3?
depends.
Yeah, because that changes things a lot, right? Eight 3-bedroom units is a lot different than 8 2-bedroom units. What are we talking about feet in terms of like height?
Well, I don't know exactly. You might be looking at, you have a 25-foot height limit in your R1 and R2 districts right now. You might be looking at buildings that exceed that height limit
Well, that's,
for that, because you probably have tuck under parking, which would drive them to like 3 stories.
okay.
Yeah.
On just the, you said townhomes,
Yeah.
or on the 8 and 7 units?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
those would be probably.
So they'd be a little taller, most likely, realistically. And then they'd be surrounded by houses that probably meet that 25-foot height limit. Sure.
So
I think-
on B, is it, oh, sorry, I didn't.
No, go ahead and ask your
Oh,
question.
on B, is it, are those, can you go back to B? The ones over here on the left, are those, did you say those are single-family homes, just larger scale, like, 2,000 square feet?
The
or-
ones on the right side of the screen?
Nope, I
On
know
the
that
left.
those are the quadplex,
Yeah.
duplex ones, but over here on the left.
The regular,
You have
yeah.
a couple of larger lots there, yeah.
So are you thinking those would be 2,000 square feet and above kind of homes, or, so we've got to,
Most
I guess I'm
likely.
trying to see what we have. I mean, it'd kind of be helpful to have like,
Well-
ideally it'd be like 5, 2,000 square foot homes and then 2 of these, or.
Right. Well, and so this is why I don't want you to get too mired in the details, because we're not designing these new homes.
Right.
We're trying to illustrate what kinds of things we might be able to accomplish through maybe some zoning changes potentially. For example, are you okay with a larger home that's actually 4 units? Is that something that you think would be of a benefit to current and future residents of the city? Is it, when we mix them in together with some larger homes, are the larger homes the things that we want to see? Do we have a preference for, in this illustration, and in the other one too, where we've got that alley, and now that side that faces the park is all residential. Those are, from a design perspective and a zoning perspective, we can shape that and make that a requirement of redevelopment of the site. Is the additional height that we might need to facilitate some of these different housing types acceptable? I really think that's important to note that on, I always forget which one is which. Elmwood, right?
Yeah.
On Elmwood, that it's at least, I think it's 5 feet actually, 5 feet wider. But when you're driving on that street, it feels very different than some of the other side streets that you would go down. And so we could see that buildings that were a little bit taller on that side, if I was driving west on this side, if they were a little bit taller than what we would normally permit, that might not have a negative impact. That might actually be appropriate for a street that's a little bit wider.
Says you.
Well, I'm asking.
Because I can say, because I live on Elmwood,
Yeah.
that traffic flow is gonna be something that you're gonna, I think most residents will have a concern with, especially if you're putting multi-families that might be 3 stories high on that road. My number one concern would be the increase in traffic and the increase in speed of traffic.
And to that, first of all, 55, 53 units is not going to, I think, be a noticeable difference over it being used as a school, where there's activities, events, buses, people coming and going with their kids because that is, we've got those crunch times, school starting, schools closing. Homes, people are kind of coming and going at different times, and it's more dispersed, if you
Traffic will
will.
decrease,
But
probably.
it's actually still used as, I mean, the field's still there, so we're still gonna see, like today, Elmwood was packed, there was a race or something in the park, which is fine.
Yeah.
But you still will see a definite increase in traffic flow. And I think naturally, with an increase in traffic flow, you see an increase in speeders.
That can be. And so one of the advantages of scaling your buildings to the road width is the reason people speed on Elmwood is because it's wider.
Well,
And it's like the open road. You can just go and there's nothing to slow you down. If you start seeing a taller building and it starts to frame in the street a little bit, if you put some more things out on that street frontage, we call that friction, people see that and they do slow down.
that's actually been studied. I'm not trying to
Oh, yeah.
challenge you, but I'm curious
Oh,
about that, because
absolutely.
I
Yes.
think it's more so Elmwood actually goes from Rochester and you can get right to
It's a total
Minor.
cut through,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's a
And that's
half a mile
okay.
road.
That's okay. But there are things that we can do from a road design perspective to help mitigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think, is it the first one that's just pretty much the way,
Yeah, this is
I mean,
like existing zoning. basically.
47 units you can do now, pretty much. So the question is, how many more units do we think we need? Do we want? Who are we trying to house in these areas? From what we heard, we kind of want to house everybody. People talked about wanting to see housing for some of the older residents so that maybe they could move out of their existing homes but still stay in the community. We could do that through accessory dwellings. That's another option that I don't think we've talked about yet, but I didn't mean to steal
it's
your,
in here, yeah.
steal your thunder. But and then also talking about attracting families and keeping the residents here who come to the city and then feel like they need to leave because they want a bigger house. And those are some of the things that we heard from the real estate focus group. So when we were thinking about this, we thought, well, is there a way that we can kind of hit several of those goals with one kind of concept by mixing some of these units together? It creates kind of an interesting dynamic too, where you've got maybe some multi-generational activity happening, especially if we think about something like this, where we might have some older residents, we might have some families, people using the park, it's right there. So the difference between this one or even this one is that's the most units, and that was what, 8?
55.
Yeah,
It's
so
not.
it's 8 more than what could probably be built today. And that's just based on our estimate of that. So
8
so
more
those are the kinds
units.
of questions that we want to know the answers to from you. Do you feel like what could be built there? I think one of the really important things that we should talk about, though, are the garages, because we know we have that ordinance, so the garage house ordinance, so we don't allow those in the front. With a narrower lot, it just seems like it makes sense that they would be detached. Doing that, I think, allows you to have a little bit bigger of a home. And do you have the pictures in there from the,
Yeah.
And the accessory dwelling is easier to attain, right, with a garage in the back. I mean, that's all over, like Birmingham, they'll have like, usually they're, little studio type things
Right.
up above the garage.
Right.
And that's what, would that open it up to all Clausen residents at that point, or are we making it exclusive to just that new development?
that's an interesting
Depends
question.
on how you do it.
Exactly. If you wanted to try it in an area, you can certainly do that. We're working with the community right now. They talked about accessory dwellings extensively and pros and cons, and they ultimately decided that they would go ahead and allow them, but they're going to allow 3 total in the whole community. And then they'll just amend their ordinance if they feel like it's a good thing and that people like it and they want more of them. And if there's, no one's asked even for them yet, so they've got a few places
And
to.
we're quite a ways ahead of the game here, I think, because these properties probably won't be available for another year or two, correct?
Most likely, yeah.
So what we're doing is we're looking at a master plan, we're coming up with concepts of what we would like to see there in the future. But there is no control over that at this point in time, right? If the
Right.
school sells the property to private individuals, all we can do is control it by zoning, correct?
Right.
Right.
And so some of the elements that we might want to consider would be the driveway accesses from these. Thinking about the height, if we want or need any additional height, if we want or need any additional housing types that we don't currently allow. And then what are our other concerns, like traffic, like speeding? Like the traffic itself, it's going to kind of be what it is and at that point, but controlling some of the negative impacts of it, like speed, certainly things like allowing the parking to be on the street helps. Again, more friction. You'll see when cars are concerned about people coming out and doors opening, they do go slower.
So you mean allowing parking on the street?
Right.
I think it's
That's
I think
a no for me.
you have a fire lane
Yeah.
issue on Elmwood.
Yeah.
And one of the sides of the street is a fire lane, I think.
But that was probably because it was the school, so it might not be.
Well, no, but it's an actual route.
Oh, it's a road, yeah. Well, then they might not be
Yeah,
supposed to do that. Maybe-
Elmwood was widened a few
Yeah.
years ago,
Yeah.
those first 3 blocks.
Yep.
Well, and Selfridge has the parking lanes for the cars or the buses too. So there's some extra space there that could be used. I mean, there you're tucked
Yeah.
off the road, so you're not in the middle of the way, but that is actually that's another form of friction, street trees.
Yeah. It's known to be a traffic calming thing, yeah.
Parking on the street is like, to me, I'm surprised that we would consider that. Wouldn't we run into an issue of like, only on Elmwood you can park on the street? Is that what you're saying? Or like all of
Well, I
Clawson?
think you can do that now, can't you?
Not after
Well,
a
not
certain time.
overnight,
Not overnight.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you could.
On one side of the road, typically it is, but, so you're saying all hours, 24 hours a day kind of thing?
It's
Or-
just
No, I'm just wondering.
Suggesting that
Yeah.
it is a technique that you can use to slow traffic down.
Okay.
Right.
I assume when these properties, when they go on the market, let's say I'm a builder, I could come in, I could buy as much of this as I want or as little. I could buy half of that, a quarter of that. And so what we have to control is what they're allowed to put on them. We can't really say that you can't buy that, cut it into quarters and put up 4 houses, right?
Well, yeah, so there's a couple things
Yeah.
you're doing with this plan. One is that you're setting the table for zoning. So you're saying, we have a plan, wow, and we are going to.
Power will be out shortly.
We are going to be able to, yeah, right. And the basement will be flooding. And you're going to be able to zone on the basis of that plan. But we're also doing another thing with the plan, which is that we're suggesting to potential developers, here's what the city would like to see. And a developer who might have otherwise said, oh, I'm just going to plunk a bunch of houses down, might look at some of that and say, okay, well, there's actually a different way I can do this.
Yeah, I like the idea of giving them the options, yeah.
Right, and you know, right now it might be hard to do a cottage court under conventional zoning. You might have to do a PUD or something to do a cottage court, because you'd have smaller land area for each house. Your net density would be the same,
Right.
but you'd have all that open space that you're preserving, and it's hard to do under conventional zoning. But we might be able to build it in so that that's one of your options to develop something like that.
But the master plan is just giving them an example of what they can do or.
Exactly.
Right.
And
prefer.
it would allow the city to then be proactive and create some zoning standards that allow for this, so that when a developer does come through, they can look at that, they can look at the zoning and say, okay, not only did they come up with a concept, we can actually go through and get our plans reviewed under those zoning standards that fit.
Yeah, and one of the policy decisions that you're going to make once you actually do look at your zoning ordinances, does this apply in the R1 and R2, or are we making it R3? and we're applying it to these two sites, and some different things can happen in R3, and maybe it becomes kind of a test bed for whether or not those things would be appropriate somewhere else. That could be accessory dwelling units, it could be duplexes or something else.
And by creating that extra district, whether it's an actual district or if it's an overlay, that could be applied to other non-residential properties in otherwise residential areas. So
Right.
if there was another church or another school that became available, then there's some certainty within both the community and the development community over what would be envisioned there.
Are they limited now? If someone bought the property and took down the school that's there, can they use that one big chunk of property the school's on to build one big building on, or is that's off the
If the
table?
building was a church or one of the other uses that's permitted in the district, yeah, they could.
They could put a church there.
So I have a question about the duplex. There's duplexes within neighborhoods now.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah,
very
so
many,
what's, huh?
Not very many.
No, but is there something right now that's stopping duplexes from this site? What exactly is stopping a duplex as
Yeah,
of now?
I don't believe they're permitted right now, or if they are, it's with a site plan or something like that.
So they've probably been grandfathered. and
Yeah,
kind of
lots,
thing.
when these neighborhoods were originally developed, it was quite common to do something like a duplex because, well, might as well build 2 units on the lot, you know? My street over in Berkeley has a quadplex at the end, and there's duplexes mixed all through, and you couldn't do it now, but nobody even notices that it's multiple units when they walk by it, you know? It's pretty much the same size as the other houses on the street. So yeah, there are duplexes mixed all in throughout the community now.
Duplexes are not permitted.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
On page 9, you have photos of duplexes.
Yes, yeah, there are some, and we can talk about that.
They're permitted in the RM district,
Yep.
multifamily.
Yes, they are permitted in the RM district. We can quickly go through the Baker site too. We've got those 3 examples there.
Can we stick on Shalom just for a minute?
Sure.
Okay, theoretically, what we're looking at on these presentations is topography. So it has nothing to do with can the drainage system hold or support this many units and the Sunoco pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, you're primarily looking at the carrying capacity of the land, and for a question like stormwater, you have to look at the land you've got, the amount of impervious surface that's going to be there relative to what's there now, and make sure that when something new gets built there, that that's accommodated in their detention system. They're going to have something underground that keeps water from leaving that site, faster than it is now.
Yeah, because it's on the hill
Yep. Yeah.
and
after the
water
entrance.
flows down.
Yep.
Right.
But isn't it more than just impervious surface? If you think about like, there's gonna be potentially, would you say 50 toilets more flushing?
Water usage.
Sure, yeah.
So, yeah, so,
They're gonna have
But
to
it's
build looped infrastructure for that,
yeah,
absolutely.
and that'll automatically be a part of any type of site plan, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah.
And we
they'll
have
go through.
asked the city engineer to give us a little bit of information on what would be needed for, in terms of capacity, and then, what would be needed, in terms of, detention
And where it would
capability
go, yeah.
and where it goes. Yeah, that's gotta be part of any, plan that comes in. You've gotta have accounted for all that.
Yeah. And based on this presentation, these are proposals to what could be
I wouldn't
used
say they're pro- I
topographically.
wouldn't say they're proposals, I would say they're examples.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the word I'd
Right.
really use.
Exactly.
And there could be
Examples, yeah.
other examples as
Right.
well.
Joe and I touched on that a little bit before the meeting,
Yeah.
so,
So you could,
yeah.
Are these from your responses from the meetings that we did in the city hall? Or?
Yeah, they tried to take into account those responses.
And how many people do they come on?
We had about 25 people, I think, altogether.
At the open house. Yeah,
house?
we got some more answers from the survey as
Yeah,
well.
I think, like I said, I think it was sort of a mixed, as Joe even said at the beginning, kind of a mixed bag of responses. There were people who said, you know what, we should have larger homes. Maybe not as many, but a couple voices that said larger homes to accommodate families and keep younger people here who seem to want a bigger home or else they're going to move away. And then there were a fair number who said we need some smaller homes like accessory dwellings or smaller units to accommodate some of the older residents. And then there were a fair number of people kind of in the middle who said we want to make sure it's just compatible with the neighborhood. Well, I think we should be realistic about whether a developer is going to come in and pay for this land, pay to have it cleared, pay to do the grading, pay to figure out stormwater, pay to figure out the sewer system, sanitary sewer system, and then say you can only build a one-story home. Because that's not, I mean, that would even be against what anybody could do across the street. If they had a ranch, they could take it down and build a two-story house. So they're not going to be ranch homes.
There is a study, or can there be a study, how to attract more families into our town with what kind of units and kind of dwellings we need to attract more? Because the reason why we're here today discussing about this is because the school doesn't have students.
Right.
And we don't have students because families don't come here and do not want to raise their children here in this town. So I see this, we're just adding to the problem if we continue to allow building same units that we have now. So is there a study as such, or can we do a study as such, or can we ask?
That was part of our real estate focus group that we talked to some local realtors. And again, I think there was sort of mixed information there as well over the kinds of homes that we needed. There were a fair number of the real estate professionals who suggested that Clawson is attracting people, younger people, and also attracting younger people with families. That once they have children, they're not necessarily leaving, at least when they're small. I think to some extent that has to do with the schools in the surrounding areas as well, and their relative attractiveness. And so I think, Erin, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that?
Well, I can say that 1,000 square feet gets small really fast when you have one or even two kids. I mean, one kid, two kids. So typically, I see a lot of people that are looking for 1,500 square feet, 2,000 square feet, but it's hard to, with this much land, you know, if you want 2,000 square feet homes, I don't necessarily, I haven't done the math, but how many would actually fit on that site? Are we really going to change?
We go high. When you go high, it's not hard anymore.
Well, yeah, we'll just build, you know, to the sky. And
It's like
so,
the rest of the world is done.
yeah, well, yeah. Okay. So that's typically what I find in most clients that we just, most of my clients are looking for, if they have multiple kids, they're looking for at least, you know, 1,500 square feet of house. And there's not a ton of that in Clawson.
So what I would say to that, I guess I'm going to get a little into anecdote here. I don't usually like to do that, but I've spent the last 11 years living in Berkeley. And if you drive through those neighborhoods, you will notice there is a lot of new construction. Like, there have to be at least 150 tear-down rebuilds in Berkeley that have happened in the last 10 years.
Big rebuilds.
Yeah, and I live in one of the very first ones that was done. And my experience over there tells me that here, on lots this size, which are sized based on your zoning regulations for the R1 and R2 districts, builders, unless they're doing something like a cottage court that's quite targeted, builders are not going to put up less than an 1,800 square foot house. They're just not going to do that. Everything that's being built in Berkeley is 1,800 square feet and up. Some of them on corners are more like 2,300. They're getting up there for the size of those lots. Berkeley does have a higher height limit. They've got a 35-foot height limit instead of 25. But I think even with the 25-foot height limit, you could easily get builders coming in and putting 1,800 square foot houses on these lots. I don't.
Well, to the point about the height, wouldn't you, and maybe I'm just that mom, I don't know, but, many floors is not necessarily ideal for kids either, especially when they're younger. Colonials are great because you got separate living space, but when it comes to like if you, and I've been to some of these condos where they're like 4 or 5 stories high, and yeah, it's a lot of space when you add it all up, but it's a lot of work. And if you're doing laundry and kids and you got babies learning to walk, it's like, no. So I don't know if that's what you're thinking in terms of height, but that, I don't know, maybe older kids, and maybe I'm getting too detailed here, but that to me, I don't know how many families, young families necessarily, that might bring in if we
Well, the
staff.
other thing I'll say is that the detached single-family home, no one's going to build a 3-story one. They might finish a basement in a 2-story one.
Say, also, though, a 2.5-story where there's like an office space upstairs, if we think about kind of what's happening with people in their work situations and where they're working, that's something that I could see happening where somebody's got an office up on their, in their attic, if you will, or a bonus space, just to kind of get a little separation from everything else that's going on, but a separate workspace. So there could be maybe not 3, but maybe 2.5 stories might be kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah, that could also transition very nicely as people want to, upgrade their homes into a bathroom or another bedroom, which I
Right.
think is a great selling thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, because you do have the colonials on the south side and on the west side.
Yeah, to the
Of that
west, once you go
property.
down Elmwood, yeah, there's a lot of colonials over there.
And tri levels
Yeah.
are on Elmwood
Yeah,
as well.
there are
yeah.
quite a few,
Right.
Yeah, which are great. I
Yeah.
love tri levels.
So I think one of the things that, we think about when we see, like in Berkeley, Birmingham, I can picture a couple streets in Birmingham too that were little ranch homes that now the whole entire street has been like twice. It's like someone came and blew everything up and started over, and they pretty much did, but over time. So thinking about like how do we keep that from necessarily happening, maybe where we allow some of these smaller, like a duplex home or even a triplex home, just maintaining some of those smaller units for people who really don't need 1,800, 2,000 square feet as something to keep in mind. As we think about, I've been talking a little bit with the executive director of the Michigan Association of Planning. We're going to be working on a session for the fall conference on housing. And so we were talking about how are we going to shape this conference and how are we going to frame it for people across the state. And one of the things that I think is worth thinking about are we hear, and I'm sure you do because you're planners now, that you hear stories about the housing crisis and you think, well, we don't really have a housing crisis necessarily here because our houses are very affordable. We may have a situation, though, where we're not providing the right kinds of housing for the residents that we have and the residents that we're going to have in the future. And so that's just something to consider as we're going through this.
It may be something that's at the risk of miring us in detail. And it may be, or I guess I'm asking if it's already covered in our ordinances, the percentage of...
Use your mic, please.
I'm sorry?
Use your mic, please.
It's on, I'm just not at it, sorry. So, in our current ordinances, whether it's setback language, whether it's some other controlling language, are our lots, especially residential lots, the percentage of concrete, the percentage of, I guess what I'm getting at is a concern about heat sink. Mm-hmm. And granted, we're losing a lot of parking lots if this, this area gets redeveloped. We're losing an area that I think is like a gravel playfield. I'm trying to think of what else is on the lot, but
Giant parking
so a
lot.
lot of that is going to
building
be
itself.
repaved, regraded. But is there something already in our ordinances that you're aware of, you can point to that says, hey, the percentage of property has to be?
It's actually one of the things that we talked about.
It's one of the things that we're working on. Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the.
Yeah.
We've discussed it once at a meeting, and you had very full agendas, so we haven't gotten it back on an agenda. But once we get through
But that can go
I'm
with.
going to say October, we'll probably start talking
Yeah,
about it.
that's definitely something that we should consider, and we should put that in here as well. As we're developing the concepts and setting the table for any zoning changes, that we put that in here.
Maybe like the prospect of,
A good place to put
the
it.
prospect of a cottage court, the prospect of an alley, not an alley, but essentially a path in one of the exhibits that will have, I guess, grass along, the lots. Yeah, and I mean, to a positive extent, putting houses, building whatever the makeup of these units are, or is, excuse me, we're giving up a lot of concrete, and I see that as a positive. I just don't, the streets,
Right.
you're adding streets, you're adding sidewalks, necessary, important for access, obviously, and aesthetics. Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, I mean, it would be even better, it would be more environmentally friendly if we actually were going to redevelop this whole building itself and not take it down and send it to the landfill. So that's something else to talk about as well. Are there any other uses, and I think we know the answer to this question, but are there any other uses that you would see as being compatible that could repurpose this building? I mean, other than what's already permitted. So it could be a school, it could be a church, a place of worship, it could be,
Or the last page of the
like a
thing, which shows a senior housing facility.
Right.
Jill, can I ask a question on not to go back, but when you said that you said something about a need for housing, and you said that we might not notice that, which I think we do, but when you think of a need for housing, what specifically are you talking about in terms of housing? Are you saying there's a need for single-family homes, or a need for housing in terms of just like one-bedroom units? What type of housing are you saying that you're thinking generally in Michigan there's a need for?
Well, generally in Michigan, there's a need, I think, for housing for older residents that are near places that are more walkable. So, like your community. When people lose the ability to drive, or they choose not to drive, they become very limited in where they can go and when they'll go. And they can become very isolated, and it can be very depressing. So that's one segment of our population that we need to consider. We also need to consider our workforce and our local businesses, and making sure that we have housing near those employment centers so that people can easily get to their job. That they don't have to commute 45 minutes to an hour away from where they work, because now it's cutting into their productivity. It may be harder for them. Transportation costs, where we trade off one set of costs, we're going to exchange them for another. So we want to consider all of those things. I think in Clawson, you've got kind of the sweet spot of, you've got a lot of walkable areas. The whole city is walkable. You've got access to things that you can walk to. So you've got the downtown, but you've got a lot of other convenience type retail and services that are located throughout the community. You're also close to employment centers, so that's good too. I think thinking about the older residents and making sure that then we start thinking about people specific. So thinking about the older residents, and I think making sure that we have a multi-generational community. So do we have younger residents? Can young people afford to buy a home here? We're probably right on that bubble of whether that's the case, and so maybe thinking about that. So those very first time, early 20s, wannabe homeowners, can they find an opportunity here that's reasonable?
Yeah, so when you say workforce, I think of more like, and this might just be me, like, Amazon built a building down over in, Hazel Park or Oak Park, and do you find that the demographics of that are supported in Clawson? Not talking our people demographics, but like the need for that, like that we do actually have workforce housing need in Clawson for a specific.
I think when we think about and there's a little analysis in the master plan document that talks about the 80 to 120% of your median household income. I think probably most of the housing is right in there. So we didn't look below 80% of median income, but if you're at 80, you're probably going to be okay for a while here until things start to get out of hand.
Okay.
Like they have in other communities where it may not be.
All right, that's helpful. Thank
Okay.
you.
There's and I'm not sure whether, I've had some involvement with our sustainability committee, and I am making some changes with regard to that, my own participation, but there was some recent discussion, and I think it's a growing discussion about population shift, about age demographic shift, and that we are having fewer children, a significant drop
Yes.
in the amount of families, traditional families, and people having babies, frankly. And so as far as the type of housing and what the concentration is or should be, I mean, granted, this is an aspirational document. This is an example of what we might do, what we suggest others can do. How far forward is a master plan generally a suggested forecast of what might happen in an area? Is it a 15-year document? Does it depend on the community? So
Yes.
There are a couple answers to that question. So I think the statutory answer is a community should be looking at its master plan every 5 years.
every 5 years.
And this qualifies as that. We're looking at our master plan and we're only updating a part of it, but nevertheless, we are actively engaged in planning. And, part of the reason, it's not like there's like a master plan cop up in Lansing who's like, oh, you haven't looked at your master plan in 5 years. But if you wind up, in litigation with someone over a zoning decision, having a recently evaluated plan or a recently completed plan puts you on solid ground if your zoning is based on your master plan,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So that's kind of how that works. And then as far as the actual time horizon that you're looking at, you're free to set that in your document.
Okay.
If you have a vision for the next 20 years, you can state that in your document. And if we do this and 5 years elapses and nothing's happened with the school sites, we're free to circle back to it, or we're free to reaffirm it.
Or
and
if the
say,
need changes.
This still makes sense.
Yeah,
Right,
if there's
exactly.
whatever it is. I mean, there are sea changes that will change the trajectory. We've had one in the last year and a half. It's changed the trajectory of our culture,
Right.
period.
Right.
And however you feel about it, whatever your views are on it, we have changed fundamentally as a society. And so I'm glad this is a series of examples. It's suggestions, examples. It's a think project, and I appreciate the opportunity to cast it according to what our citizenry would like. What they're thinking, what from all angles.
So what other information do you think you'd like to see to help move our conversation along? I know that Ed would probably like to be part of this conversation, and Scott too. So you don't have to necessarily decide anything tonight, but is there a direction that you feel like you might be leaning towards, and what other information would help you understand or advise?
The idea of giving future builders as much freedom as we
need some
can.
builders input.
Within reason. The way I see it playing out, once this goes away and it's bought up by the real estate market or a developer to come in, the developer is going to look at what his options are, what I can do.
Right.
And I think the market at that point in time is going to feed what he's going to build. You're not going to build something that you can't sell or rent.
Exactly.
So I think it's what the current standards are is what he would want to put in. I think we'll be flexible with that, as long as we give them as much flexibility as we can, but keep the big condominiums away from the area is my
Yeah.
thought.
Sure.
I think also what what Commissioner Redmond raised about, what information we might have about what the market is. I think, Aaron, you did raise that question. What type of house is or what type of housing is in demand or projected to be in demand? To the extent that that's already been compiled or contributed to by the real estate open house that we had, I think that would be helpful.
Well,
Even if it's just
can I make a comment real
Sure.
quick on that? Because I can tell you that, I've sold like 1,000 square foot homes in Clawson, and I've sold, 1,600 square foot homes. And the amount of people that show up in those 1,600 square foot, so it might not be necessarily like an overall demand, but I do think in terms of Clawson that there is a demand for a if we did have more 1,500 square foot, 1,600 even, I'm not even saying 2,000, those will, even though we can't really necessarily see the demand because we don't have a ton of it already here, but I think that it will be a demand once, they will be desired once they're here.
And Aaron, do you know if those are, whether it's regional information from the Michigan Association of Realtors that might be, a help?
Well, it's hard to get stats on that because we don't have a ton to pull stats from. So that's
Here,
kind of what I'm saying.
Right here,
Yeah.
but I mean more. We're in a region, right? We're in a locale. We have not a homogeneous population, but whatever information might be available to get a read on.
Oh yeah, we
the
can
type
pull
of
numbers in terms of regionally, like how many, 1,000 square foot homes. We can even say days on market as like a way to kind of gauge. Okay,
Okay.
to gauge a demand versus like in the area 1,500 to 2,000 square foot homes, days on market or over asking or however. There's a lot of different gauges, right, that we can use to determine a demand for that. Or even above 2,000, but I don't think we'll go there here in Clawson
right.
just yet. But yeah, I would say that we could probably kind of, it's not anything that someone's published, but I think we can kind of do our own little diligence and kind of set our scale of what we might find ways of demand being shown in the market, right?
I think it's relevant to the things could change, but this is a document based on change.
Right. So Clawson's part of a regional market, and there's sub-regions within the region too, because Greater Detroit is a huge area, and then we have kind of the Woodward corridor, southeast Oakland County as our sub-region, and within any region, and then within its various sub-regions, you have a certain amount of demand for various housing types, and when you do an economic assessment and you do forecasting for housing demand, you talk about marketable opportunities. So these are things that you could potentially bring to your community, and you will never capture all of them because you have other communities where some of those will go. But these lots represent one of your larger marketable opportunities in a very, very long time, because this much land just doesn't become available in Clawson very often. It hasn't for decades. So you're going to capture something here. It's a matter of what you're communicating you want to capture.
Can I say something in terms of what we're looking for to answer your question earlier? First off, you already know, and Jill does, that I love the cottage court kind of idea, and I do feel like, as being a part of this community, that there is an elder population who
Sure.
I see all the time. They're multi-generational, and I'm selling one right now that's the home was built. Her mom built the home, and they just don't leave. They love Clawson. It's a community, and I don't think that they have an opportunity to get a senior living in Clawson unless they're just staying in that house. And I do think that by freeing some of those up with a cottage court type facility for our older generation, that I think that it gives them, especially being by the park, and I said to Jill already, I just see it as working so well because they get to watch the dogs and the football and I just think that it would work really well. With that said, when we talk about duplex and fourplexes, I also think that would work as a great transition piece as well.
Sure.
But in terms of what we're talking about in zoning, what would stop? I know that it's only zoned as R1 or R2.
R2, yeah.
R2.
They're pretty much the same.
Yeah, but besides that specific zoning, we want to potentially open it up to allow for duplexes because they're not allowed right now, but we potentially might not want a multi-level apartment building that essentially could be the same height as a duplex, potentially, right? Because some of the I've seen apartment buildings that are not, I've seen duplexes higher than apartment buildings,
Sure,
depending.
yeah.
So are we looking to get that specific in this zoning of this?
Yeah, I think if you said you were good with a duplex, a triplex, and a quadplex, and we say no more than 4 units in a building,
That's just an easy way.
That's
Okay.
as specific as you have to get, exactly.
So you can go feet, whatever, and just
And then
narrow
you
it
can
to
make
that.
more general statements about being in character with the surrounding district in a plan. And then when you're zoning off of that plan, you get specific about saying, all right, we have this, whatever it is, 25-foot height limit or whatever. That's when when you're doing the zoning. But I brought up the cottage court page here. Right now, like I said earlier, this is real hard to do. It's basically a planned unit development in order to do it. And we could make it a permitted use in an overlay that sits on these 2 sites. And with that hurdle of the complex development process out of the way, it makes it a lot more likely that someone would come in and say, hey, I could do this here. It's a good opportunity. There's not a lot of senior housing in this community. However, there are a lot of people aging into the senior housing market in this community who might like to stay there. I can provide them the opportunity to stay there with a cottage court on this property, and look at that. It's a permitted use, so I can just do it by right.
So we would say specifically cottage court, or would that in itself open us up to them having free reign is what I'm kind of, and I don't want to.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't want to get too specific, like Jill said,
would,
and say, hey, this is what you're building here.
you would define a cottage court, and you would give some parameters under which one could be developed.
Okay.
And
That would be covered under the master plan. This is simply a plan, and the ordinances are going to be what's controlling the building sizes and locations.
exactly. So when you're doing the ordinance, let's say we're calling it the R3 overlay. You put cottage court in there as a permitted use, and you say, you define it, and then you have a little set of standards for here's what a cottage court can do. And you can, reduce the side setbacks by this much, and you can do this and this and this in order to get the development character that we're looking for. So you get a little bit of leeway on some of the typical standards in order to get, a form that works for your audience, basically.
Okay, and not to get too specific or steal all of everybody's time, but have you looked at and gone deeper into if cottage court living is actually affordable for our seniors in Clawson?
Sure, it can be, and it depends on how you, regulate it too a little bit. But I mean, I'm sure that there are luxury cottage court developments around the country. I'm sure there are ones that are advertised as luxury, and most people probably wouldn't really consider them luxury once they saw the inside, because there's lots of housing that's advertised that way. And then I'm sure there are plenty that are also very affordable. I know a few of the examples that are up here come from, the one up in the upper right is a very old one. The one on the bottom, that's an example of one that's meant to be affordable. So that's another thing that we can say in our master plan is that, we're when we, in reference to cottage courts and perhaps some of these other units, is that we're looking to create more of, attainable housing, which is a term we're using in the draft. As affordable housing has a specific definition under HUD rules and
Right.
things. So that's maybe not necessarily what we're asking for, although we would love to see it. Attainable housing is really the goal that we're striving toward.
And to that point, I guess I feel like I should.
Yes. Gotta have the microphone.
We think about, so offsetting the cost of development, that's another reason why we have situations with housing across the country, is that it's very expensive to build housing.
Especially right now.
Especially right now. So we've got a trade shortage, as well as material costs are more expensive, and then we have the cost of the land itself. And in this case, the cost of clearing the land is also a cost. And so when we think about that, we want to make sure that when we say we'd like cottage courts, that we're making sure that that is indeed something that's, we shouldn't feel bad that the developer wants to make some money off of this, because otherwise they're not going to do it. Sure. So thinking about, like, is there a way to trade that off? And that was why in some of our concepts, we kind of did two things. We said, well, and that might be something here, like you can build these cottage courts, and if we let you build something that's a little bit bigger, kind of, right there and mix it all in, so that we're kind of balancing the cost of development over that. There's other options that we could include as well. And even like this is just totally off the top of my head, but maybe there would be some way to partner with the schools to make sure that the cost of development isn't prohibitively expensive based on the sale of the property itself, or maybe there's some ownership that's still there. I don't know, I'm just kind of
Do we have
thinking out.
influence on that? Because
No.
that was one of the things I
mention it
asked
in the
our
master plan.
superintendent, is like, well, why would
Yeah.
you spend millions of dollars to level these buildings instead of allowing a developer to come in and do a brownfield, or, because those buildings could qualify, right?
Definitely. I think we could put that into our implementation strategies to look at some of those other alternatives in terms of financing or other redevelopment tools. And there's a lot of tools that are available to us.
That's the other thing to think about, is a developer might acquire this site, and they might be a single-family home specialist, but knowing what's available, they might sell a portion to someone who would do the cottage court and another portion who would do the multiplex. And then they do the single-family home portion of it. That's the kind of approach that might lead to the sort of varied type of design that we were showing earlier. That's a definite possibility. One of the nice things about the cottage court, and why it's often used as a form of affordable housing for seniors, is that you can build it in a way that lowers a lot of your infrastructure costs, because you don't need as much driveway and you don't need as much pavement and things like that. And the houses generally are a little smaller, so the cost of actually building them and the materials for building them is a little bit lower. And then obviously with multiplex, you're putting multiple units in a single building, and the superstructure of the building is the most important part, is the most expensive part of building the building. So if you can get multiple units in one superstructure and you're just sectioning the building off, that's a cost-effective way to build. And it's also more sustainable, because the heat from one unit gets trapped by the units above, and you don't, when you have a single family home, it's got to be all self-contained, whereas multiple units in one building can kind of feed off each other a little bit.
Well, I talked to a developer a couple of years, maybe it was a year ago or so, and they just said that they couldn't make numbers work in terms of the infrastructure, like in the drainage and all the stuff they have to do, unless they were able to do, like, I forget if it was like 5 acres and so many units, and they're a big fourplex developer, that they're like, look, we just can't, numbers just don't work unless we're able to do this.
Sure. Yeah, the pro formas are a little crazy right now because of the cost of materials is just through the roof, and the cost of labor is very high. I imagine that will be persistently high for a long time. The material costs will probably come down, pretty dramatically over the next couple of years, but I imagine the cost of labor is going to be high for a long time. But yeah, I mean, you know, one of the lines that people like to use in a meeting is, "Oh, well, they're just trying to make money," and well, yes,
It's
yes,
their
they are.
job.
They're a
Yeah.
business. Of course, they're trying to make money. You know, and yeah, there is a certain threshold below which most projects just cannot drop, or they're not worth doing for the developer.
And a lot of risk too, right? Yeah,
Sure,
yeah.
it's a very high risk venture right now.
You know,
You want
Joe.
to move on to Baker? or-
Well, I was just going
That's
to add, you know, while I'm staring at the cottage court examples, you know, whether it's cottage court or accessory dwellings, I kind of like these concepts where we're providing more green space, more parks, well, you know, pseudo park space. Even on some of your other options that you presented, there was a common space and a park space, right?
Sure.
You know, I've been staring at the language in the master plan and as well as your amendment, but, you know, in the original language, you know, it describes measures to protect the character of those neighborhoods. And I think we need to be mindful of that, especially with this particular area. And it's you know, on Shalom itself, there's a lot of, you know, like folks have shared before, there's a lot, you know, there's traffic, there's a lot of pedestrians and walkers, and it's right now it's a public, well, it's a school, but it's, you know, after hours it's a public facility. People like to use the playground and the ballpark. It would be a shame if all of a sudden we lost that space to be able to use and share communally or as a community.
Sure.
The space is lost though, because that building is going to go down.
What's that?
That space will be lost because that building is going to go away, right?
Yeah. Well,
Right.
yeah. I mean, some of the space will
outside
be
of the
lost.
building, I'm talking about like the outdoor
Playground,
area.
everything.
Yeah, if the
Because
city
the
doesn't
guys
buy
will
the
solve it.
playground area, it's going to be developed.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is trying to preserve some elements of it to be able to spend time outdoors, right? So that's why I find like the cottage court concept attractive in trying to protect some of that characteristics of the neighborhood, so that you can still see people outside, and being able to use that space.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Even if it's the amount of actual publicly accessible space is much lower. Still seeing the neighbors out on the street
Right.
is huge for psychologically, you know, for how you feel in a neighborhood. And then, you know, one of the things that any overlay for these sites should include is major street tree requirements, so that you're greening the place up, and any, you know, heat effect that you've got from the current parking lots and things there is completely obliterated by the fact that you're building a canopy in the area. And that's the other thing about trees, is they're also a traffic calming device. If you've got big trees on either side of a street and you have a sense of enclosure on that street from those large trees, people tend to drive slower, like noticeably slower. There's quite a bit of study that's gone into that. So getting a real nice wall of street trees on the north side of that road, it could ultimately have a traffic calming effect.
What about speed bumps? Just kidding. I don't know.
That would certainly have a traffic calming effect.
They're not as effective as like.
No, I wouldn't think so,
trees and
yeah.
wide
Yeah.
and narrower streets.
They drive me crazy. I really don't like speed bumps, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. People like to test their shocks. All right. Well, it's been some good feedback. I don't know that we need to go too much into any of these specific conversations. We've kind of touched on all of it.
Really good feedback tonight.
Yeah.
So can you just tell me, I know prior when we spoke about this, we weren't sure if Baker, if we were gonna, was that ball field part of the city or part of Baker? I thought that was brought up once before.
So Baker, I got the site here.
I know Rennis is looking into any deed restrictions on these properties.
Yes, he is.
Oh.
So
No, that's school property, because I was on board
It
yeah.
is? Oh, okay.
This,
because
Yeah.
there was a big trade with the city on that.
yeah.
So the school district at that time did get that property
Right.
with the ball diamond.
So I've got that outlined in red there. So the
Okay.
ball diamond's part of it. This little house here on the corner actually is an outlot. But otherwise, it's this part and this part that are going to be sold. And then to the north, you do have some open land that is still city-owned.
Yeah, that's a buffer.
South of the DPW.
Yeah, the buffer between the ball field and DPW.
Yep. Yeah, so that will remain open.
So this is approximately 2 acres or something like that, I think, right? To just
Yeah,
give
roughly,
context to
yeah.
it.
It's a little more.
And you're looking there, was that something that you're looking to continue and keep kind of a new face in terms of congruency with Shawm, since it is only a street away? Are we trying to stay congruent with the feel and look of those things there, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately what you're probably looking at is the street to the east continuing through where the parking lot is now. And, well, I mean, I guess we've got some examples of the way it could be done right here. And, this one really is just a continuation of the surrounding neighborhood. But, within that, you could consider some of that multiplex type development or even the cottage court, especially down on the bottom part, which is roughly the right size. You have about 1.25 acres south of the road and then a little more than 1.5 north. But you can see the way that conceptually these multiplex units have been worked in. They front on this open space, and there's a single-family home here that picks up on the neighborhood and kind of carries that across the street before you get to the multiplex.
Those are multiplexes?
Yeah.
I could see where that would be not as harsh too, because we have the DPW building there as well,
Sure,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it kind of feels like a good transitional
Yeah.
place.
Right. And I think, we provided an example that goes a little further than that. This is maybe getting a little big for the area. But it's kind of got that same sense of, okay, there's some open space here and then the DPW yard. So that if you're going to go big somewhere, you don't do it right next to the existing single-family homes. You do it where it's kind of buffered from them.
And those are the garage drives there? Is that under parking? Those little
Yeah,
lines?
yeah,
Okay.
that's what that
And
would
that's
be.
facing the street though, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to the front of the house, which I'm sure you could switch around, right?
You could
'Cause-
always, yeah.
Yeah. Because we'd probably want it the other way, right? Or no?
Yeah, I mean, most likely, if it's a street, you want that front of the building facing it, generally speaking.
Okay.
Which is what you have here, where you've got kind of a drive in the back
That same,
along the
if
north.
you go to the next one, it could be that same thing where we have alley access.
Yeah.
and Garages in the middle.
Because
and then
right-
in front became,
Right here, you basically got a driveway
yeah,
that goes to these rear garages, and you just have a
Maybe that
continuous
common-
sidewalk here.
that common green
Yep,
with the access down.
yeah. And this one, you could flip these and do the same basic thing.
But with that one, they could have a green space proposal to the north of the units.
Yep.
And the other options that you presented, do we lose that green space, that park, or we have a different backdrop in each of the options?
Oh, this one here, yeah, this
Yeah.
green space is always there, because this
Okay.
is city-owned, not school. Yeah, it's part of the DPW site, but it's not fenced as part of the DPW site. So it's open, and it could potentially be developed as parkland, yeah.
There's a soccer field there, I believe, isn't there? Right? No?
No, it's on the baseball diamond.
No, there's a soccer field. Well, maybe it's to the side of
It's-
DPW.
It's to the east of the DPW
Yeah,
yard.
okay, yeah. And this
Yeah.
is behind it that
Oh,
would
Yeah,
be,
that's,
right? Okay.
that's
okay.
city property too.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions, comments? Did we give you guys enough information to go by?
Yeah, that was good.
I imagine you'll be bringing it back to us a couple more times.
Yeah.
And do either of you work with the school board at all to, like, are you guys, I know at the beginning we were kind of all chatting back and forth. Is that still a thing, or not necessarily?
Not directly.
Yeah, because I didn't know if they had an input. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
In terms of process, just, look at your draft language for discussion. To me, it almost sounds like it's more a zoning ordinance and zoning planning type of language. Is this, do we need to update the master plan in order to make that happen? Or in order to make this, what we've been talking about, happen once we come to a decision?
Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're updating the master plan to set the basis for creating zoning that allows this stuff to happen, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, if we're done with that master plan, we'll move on to agenda item number 8 is the planner's report.
I'm going to pass something out. This is a little fact sheet we put together on marijuana for all of you. And it's going to be on the city website as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jump in while you're doing that. So this is information that generally you've seen before, whether it was at our town hall meeting a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years ago now, and in some of the PowerPoint presentations that we've had as we've had our discussions about regulating cannabis. We, just as a reminder, want to have the Planning Commission be preparing some zoning ordinance language should there be licensing language either adopted or approved this fall. So our creating the zoning ordinance doesn't allow cannabis to occur anywhere in the city, but it would just put us ahead of the game in terms of regulating where and how such facilities could be located should those things happen. So, you've seen some draft language, we've asked some questions, we've been talking about it for a couple of months. We are going to bring you some solid language at the September 14th meeting. And then, just so that we are staying on top of our timeline, knowing that we have those ballot initiatives on the November ballot, we'd like you to set the public hearing for the next meeting in October. So it wouldn't be the very next meeting that you have, but the one after that. So you have one meeting to look at it. We'll talk about some comments. You've largely seen this. I think we're just kind of tightening up the areas in which we had some questions that we've talked about in previous meetings. We'll get that to you within the next, more than a week before the next meeting. We'll get like 2 weeks before the next meeting so that you have it. And then we'll have these frequently asked questions. We wanted you to take a look at it, and we can get that posted on the city's website. It's just basic information about what are the laws that regulate cannabis in the state. What are some commonly used terms? So there's some definitions and some pictures that kind of give people an idea of what they look like. There's just a quick summary of a couple of our nearby communities, and then also a map on the back, I think, that actually has a link to more current. That map is from about a month ago or maybe 2. So there could be new facilities that are located. But I think it's just helpful for people to see, kind of big picture, where are they and what kinds of facilities are there, and then zooming in, which are a little bit closer to here. So anything else you wanted to add about that?
Not about that, but
Okay.
I will note that the other item on the September 14th agenda is 655 South Main.
I'll ask if you have any questions about the cannabis. We don't want to get into too much of a conversation about it, though, just because we don't have it on the agenda. But if there were any questions about the information, feel free to shoot us an email and ask if you have anything else that you'd like us to bring together. Okay. Good.
655 Church of Clausen will be at our next meeting?
It will.
For sure they will.
It will. We've confirmed.
Okay, I kind of got word of that this afternoon, yes, so I was going to proceed a little further with that one. I see Jones on the wall there. Does she have any comments to make about what's going on around town? Anything new, old?
All our big construction projects are moving along. No major delays except for the supply chain delays that, everybody's having everywhere. So I think the framing is nearly done on the ACE project. So, and yes, Church of Clausen did turn in all of the documents that we need. So we should be all set there.
Good. Lucky Duck's moving along. I see they're working on the outside of the building there.
Yeah, everybody's working along again. I get questions, how long is it gonna take on everything? Don't know. It's construction, and right now, there are a lot of construction supply issues, and so things are moving along though.
Yeah, okay. Very good, thank you. I'll move on to staff report and training opportunities.
That was it.
That was it. That was
That
it.
was it.
And we probably have no legal update tonight. I don't see Rennis around, so. Anybody else have any comments before we close down? If no comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn the meeting of August 24th, 2021 of the Planning Commission.
Support.
Motion, support. Can I have roll call, please?
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Cusero,
Yes.
Mr. McHale,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Mr. Pernick.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Stay dry.